Okay, here we go. We are in Proverbs. This is lesson 10 of our virtual Proverbs class. And the material for this class is available online on our website, bellairchurchofchrist.org. Media, Bible class material, you'll find Proverbs there along with other current and previous classes. But we will go ahead and jump in to our study for tonight, which is about the topics of idleness, drunkenness, and gluttony. I hope you're reading through Proverbs to help prepare for or to complement this class. And when you read through Proverbs, you see that from chapter 10 to the end of the book, basically speaking, each verse, sometimes a group of verses, but each proverb is individual and oftentimes unrelated to the proverb ahead of it or after it. And so, what this material has done, again, this is not my material, I'm borrowing it from my dad and brother who have used this class in other times and places. And this material collects those individual proverbs into buckets for the second half of the course. So, starting with parents and children down to where we are today, each of these classes is about a different category which the Proverbs address in these various individual statements throughout the book. And so tonight we're talking about these three things that may seem like different topics, but I think we will see really relate to one another. In fact, the goal is to look at all three of these things, laziness, drunkenness, and gluttony, and to talk about the issue of self-control or self-discipline. And so by the end of class, the hope is that we have a better understanding of the consequences of not having self-control. And going along with that, we want to be better. We want to improve ourselves. And so we want to have, by the end of this class, also a determination and maybe more know-how about how it is to improve our self-discipline and avoid those consequences that the Proverbs describe and that we are probably familiar with in our life and the life of others as well. We have not done this in the other classes in Proverbs so far, but these are objectives. So these are more factual, concrete things that you could repeat or recite back to me or to somebody else at the end of this class. And knowing those facts obviously isn't enough. The goal, the improvement of our character is what we are ultimately striving for. But if we can learn some of these facts along the way, they will be stepping stones to achieving the goal. Once these things are in our mind, they can go into our hearts and improve our lives. And so we want to be able to, by the end of class, and I'll come back to these, list the things which seem to have rule over the sluggard, the drunkard, and the glutton, to list three things that the sluggard, drunkard, and glutton have in common, and to list at least three principles of disciplined work. And so we'll see how we do with that by the end of the lesson. But let's go ahead and talk about each of these three things. We'll spend more time, majority of our time in the first part of the lesson on laziness, and then we'll talk some about drunkenness and then a little bit about gluttony as well before we then look at the flip side and the positive aspects, especially as it regards to disciplined work. Okay, the sluggard. Maybe you're familiar with that term in reading or hearing about the book of Proverbs. And you may remember that there are some pretty graphic, pitiful pictures of the sluggard in the book of Proverbs, but what does this look like? So, chapter 12, verse 11, it's also very similar to 28:19, which I believe is the verse listed first on your handout. He who works his land will have abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment. So the picture is of someone who has a lot of great ideas. You know, they're always thinking, man, it would be so wonderful if we did this, or I could do this. Great ideas, but not doing anything. These are fantasies that are out there that he is chasing. 26:13-16. The sluggard says, there's a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish, too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. The sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who answer discreetly. Okay, what's the picture here? Someone who has a lot to say, particularly in regards to excuse making. There's a line in the road is probably the most extreme example of an excuse that the sluggard makes. This idea of turning on its hinges, a door on its hinges compared to the sluggard turning in his bed. We'll talk about this more in a minute. I think literal sleep is a huge problem for the sluggard. He's a sleepy guy, sleeping in, hard to get out of bed. But the metaphor of a door turning is this idea of a lot of motion, a lot of posturing, a lot of acting like he's going to do something, but in the end, nothing is ever accomplished. So we have dreaming, talking, acting like something is going to be done, but nothing is ever done. And so tasks remain incomplete. And not only is nothing accomplished, but there is a benefit that is lost, obviously. You could enjoy that potato chip if you could just bring it back to your mouth, but the sluggard is too lazy to do that. Obviously, that expands to bigger things. You could enjoy this wonderful thing in life, but there's not the follow-through to actually carry it out and benefit from it. But then when it's all said and done, we're left again with nothing concrete, nothing tangible, but just more excuses, more rationalization. Well, in the end, it was better that I didn't do that, or this is the reason why it turned out this way. This is the picture of chapter 26. 19:24, again, the sluggard buries his hand in the dish, will not even bring it back to his mouth. 12:27, the lazy man does not roast his game, but the diligent man prizes his possession. And so you have game that is even brought back. How did the lazy man end up with it? That's an interesting question. Was the game given to him, the meat given to him by somebody? Did he actually go at least as far as to bring it home? But then he doesn't roast it. So there are resources and opportunities that go wasted because the sluggard doesn't have the follow-through to make the most of it. 10:26. This is a picture in his relationship. So not just his own life, but in his relationships. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is a sluggard to those who send him. What are his relationships like? What do other people think of him? Well, they're annoyed by him. They can't depend on him. They give him things to do and he doesn't do them. And so it's just an annoyance. It's like smoke to the eyes. You'd rather not even deal with the person because you know that they're not going to be able to get anything done for you. This is the picture of the sluggard in the book of Proverbs. So, what would he say about all this? What is his side of the story, so to speak? Let's notice a few things here. Chapter 20, verse 4 says, "A sluggard does not plow in season, so at harvest time he looks, but finds nothing." Some of these proverbs vary from translation to translation. The New American Standard says a sluggard does not plow after harvest. I'm not an agricultural expert, so it could be that what I'm saying is totally wrong. But I'm imagining that in farming, in the autumn, harvest time, you've brought everything in. You've made your harvest. But then right after that, there is work to be done to prepare your fields for the next season, for the planting in the spring. And maybe there's a limited time because when winter comes, there's not a whole lot you can do anyway. But in the late autumn, there's things to do to get your fields ready for the springtime. What would the sluggard say about that? Oh, well, we just finished harvesting. We just did all this work to bring in this year's crop. Maybe we can just wait a little bit longer. We'll wait till the spring to get back to work. Or, it's getting really cold this time of year. It's too hard to get out there and do it. Well, that might be his excuse, but by the next harvest time, the lost result becomes apparent. 22:13, we saw this before in another passage. The sluggard says there's a lion outside, or I'll be murdered in the streets. It's interesting. We hear these as excuses, right? There's always this threat that's out there. And oftentimes the lazy person has this imagined threat or imagined problem that, oh, well, if I try to do that, this terrible thing might happen, right? Everyone's out to get me, so there's no reason for even trying. That may be the picture in 22:13, but in 15:19, it says the way of a sluggard is blocked with thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. So there's a couple things going on here, because this passage here indicates that life does have its difficulties and complications, but it makes clear that those difficulties and complications are made worse by laziness. And so the sluggard has more problems in life because he has created those problems by not being proactive, not being diligent to address them or to avoid them. So put these two ideas together. On one hand, you have somebody that is very ready to make excuses. Okay, because of their laziness, they are looking for any kind of thing to say, oh, that's a threat. Oh, that's a danger. Oh, that's too hard. But they are also then, because of their laziness, creating real obstacles, real challenges for themselves. And maybe it becomes that much easier the next time around to say, oh, it's just too hard. Oh, I can't overcome that particular challenge. So we have threats and challenges, some real, some imagined perhaps, but that becomes a downward cycle that just makes life harder and harder. Okay, hope that makes sense. We'll see something similar in the next section. But before we get to drunkenness, let's talk about laziness and its consequences. So, again, the sluggard, chapter 13, verse 4, craves and gets nothing, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. Okay, so what is this a picture of? We talked about this with the way of life, the way of death. One of the things that makes living in folly so miserable and devoid of that quality of life that wisdom brings is that in folly, you're always hoping for something, but you're never getting it. And so it's just frustrating to live dreaming about what could be, hoping that life might be different, but never actually doing anything about it. And so you crave and get nothing is the picture of the consequence in chapter 13. Chapter 12, verse 24, diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in slave labor. So if you're lazy, you can't get anything done. That's going to limit what you're able to do, limit your own independence, limit your own self-reliance to a degree. And so the employee that never gets anything done is going to have a manager on his back all hours of the day because he needs it and he requires it. And he's not going to like it, but laziness got him to that point, we might say. What else? 28:19, he who works his land will have abundant food, but the one who chases fantasies will have his fill of poverty. This is the parallel to 12:11 that we noticed earlier. It said the one who chases fantasies lacks judgment. But here the result of that lack of judgment, the result of that chasing of fantasy and daydreaming is poverty. And that poverty becomes more thorns to make the path more difficult going forward. This is the result of laziness. All kinds of rationalizations you can make, we saw earlier, but in the end, it's hard. It's a hard life. It's an unfulfilled life, and there are very real consequences, not only monetarily, materially, we would say, but also in relationships and in personal fulfillment, not to mention a person's relationship with God, we want to say, that suffer because of laziness. But what's the real problem in this situation? And so this gets back to the word that we mentioned earlier, and you'll see how many times we notice sleep being mentioned by the proverb writer. 10:5, he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. Work to do, but the sluggard is sleeping. 20:13, do not love sleep, or you will grow poor. And then famously, chapter 6, 6 to 11, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer, ruler, yet it stores its provision in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, scarcity like an armed man. Sleep is the critical problem here. But what do we mean by that? Well, on one hand, I think we know that literally sleep is a problem for the lazy person. Maybe we have been in this situation. Maybe we know people that have missed a job interview because they slept in, missed a flight somewhere because they slept, and that caused real problems in their relationships. Maybe just having a hard time getting out of bed, that becomes a chronic habit, and it limits the productivity that a person is able to have in their personal life, in their work life, in their family, whatever it might be. Real, literal sleep is is something to deal with. But we could also maybe broaden it out and think about sleep as representative of, I want to be comfortable. And I'm more concerned about my being comfortable and what's pleasant for me becomes my primary concern, and all other concerns are missed. Or maybe the short-sightedness of, I'm not really thinking about what's tomorrow or down the road. I'm thinking about right now what I want. And all of that kind of focus on the moment, focus on my comfort, that then, as we point out here, it clouds my judgment. And I'm not thinking clearly. I'm kind of walking through life in this haze where I'm unconcerned with problems that are out there, either in the future or in other people's lives. And I'm really just kind of drowsily going along thinking about what is pleasant and comfortable for me in the moment. That, I think, is the picture and the problem of the lazy person in Proverbs. And we get more of that in 24:30 to 34. You notice here now the picture similar to what Jesus talked about in the Gospels of a field that is in ruins, a building that is half finished. Why? Because the lazy person just wanted to sleep a little longer. But again, it's that idea of short-sighted, momentary pleasure becoming the priority. And so great benefit that could have been accomplished comes to nothing because of that. And so in the context of all of that, think about 18 verse 9. One who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys. Interesting. Think about that. That laziness goes hand in hand with destruction. We destroy our own lives. We not only miss out, so there is potential that is lost, but things in our own life, relationships, work, opportunities can decay and crumble if we put the moment and our personal comfort over all other concerns. Okay, that's the sluggard in the book of Proverbs. A picture of drunkenness in 23:29 to 35. We'll read this. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine. Do not gaze at the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Your eyes will see strange sights, and your mind imagine confusing things. You will be like one sleeping on the high seas, lying on top of the rigging. They hit me, you will say, but I am not hurt. They beat me, but I do not feel it. When will I wake up so I can find another drink? What's the picture here? And this probably is not only graphically obvious in the text, but maybe we're aware of it from our own life and the lives of others. There are just problems that are associated with drinking. Personal problems, even health problems, bloodshot eyes, sorrow and complaint and bruises. But it just destroys relationships as well, as we are aware of. But the problem is that drunkenness, like other desires, there is this attraction. Maybe that's the initial attraction that is, maybe social. You can join in with other people having fun, or maybe there is an attraction of I just drink and enjoy it and forget my problems. But that initial attraction also then becomes a conditioning that we literally condition ourselves physiologically oftentimes through that consumption of alcohol. And it can become, and does become for many people, a real addiction. And even in small amounts, especially today, it clouds, it hinders our clear thinking and our perception and our judgment. So the proverb describes, it's like you're on the high seas and you're seeing strange sights. But even in the less extreme cases, there is a changing of the way our brains function and a lack of clarity when affected under the influence, of course, of alcohol. And there are severe consequences. And so the picture here of being beat up is a picture of those severe consequences. And yet, what does the person that is addicted to wine, the drunkard, what is he looking for? His relief is found, he thinks, in the next drink, in the next weekend where we can repeat the process over again. And so in that sense, similar to what we saw with idleness or laziness, this is a vicious cycle in which the appeal of the alcohol drives him to it. It clouds his judgment. It hurts him physically, hurts his relationships, causes sorrow, and yet out of that sorrow, the thought is, I just need some more. And so drunkenness destroys a person in that sense, and those are the consequences that Proverbs talks about. So monetarily, financially, spending all your money on booze, and your resources are lost to that. And so you cannot improve your life or help others with your money because you've wasted it all on drink. Notice the advice for the king, Lemuel, from his mother in chapter 31. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, not for kings to drink wine or rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what the law decrees and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Let me just point out here that this is to me profound, that King Lemuel's mother says, you're above this. Your standards ought to be higher than this, that you realize you have a responsibility not only for yourself, but also for others. And so giving yourself over to wine and beer, it corrupts your judgment. That's not proper for a king. And more specifically, under that influence, you will end up harming other people, oppressing other people, neglecting other people. And so Lemuel's mother wisely says, stay away from it. You're above that. Because there are real consequences of giving over to it. Okay, and then talking about gluttony, notice the pictures here and the similarities to what we've seen before. And notice how it's lumped together with drunkenness. 23, 20, and 21. Do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes themselves in rags. So again, it's this in a different way here. And I'm not sure why, but I think we have tended in our world to dismiss gluttony as that's never a sin we could ever be guilty of for some reason. But think about this. This is like the person who is so consumed with drink, person that's all about eating. And not just about eating, but eating the best things and eating more things. There is a giving up of resources for that. Imagine the person, maybe it's us, that is literally putting themselves in financial straits month after month because they're just eating out too much. They're too concerned with eating good food, maybe lazily getting what's convenient, and that becomes a financial difficulty. But it also, drowsiness clothes them in rags. It also can cloud a person's judgment as well. When food becomes the priority, then they're not thinking straight anymore. Interesting passage in 23. When you sit down to dine with the ruler, note well what is before you. Put a knife to your throat if you're given to gluttony. Do not crave his delicacies, for that food is deceptive. A couple interesting things here. On one hand, there's just a lifestyle that's being described here. A lifestyle that is revolving around pleasure, and specifically the pleasure of eating. And if our life revolves around the pleasure of eating, that's not a good way to be in. And the proverb is warning about that because it is creating values that are not constructive and building us up and healthy for us, but it actually is destructive. Like the other habits we've seen, tears us down. 23, 6-8, so later on in that chapter. Do not eat the food of a stingy man. Do not crave his delicacies. Same thing we saw earlier, avoiding that lifestyle. He is the kind of man always thinking about the cost. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. You will vomit up the little you have eaten and will have wasted your compliments. This is more about how you can get sucked into to a bad situation for the love of food. And that is being cautioned against. And then 25:16, maybe this is the point that we need to focus on. If you find honey, eat just enough, too much of it, and you will vomit. Again, I just kind of point this out here humbly that, maybe you have heard or said yourself, and we talk about, that there are benefits to, things like portion control or watching how much we eat, not overeating. But how much do we think about that as a spiritual discipline? That there is really something to living wisely in the way that we interact with, our own eating and the way that we navigate that. And understanding that in a similar way to what Jesus says about you just want to keep eating, you're not concerned about things that really satisfy. If we're trying to find satisfaction in food, we're just going to make ourselves sick, maybe literally and metaphorically, trying to satisfy ourselves with things that don't satisfy us, as opposed to being content with what we have, with just enough, and looking to greater things to satisfy us. But let's think about all three of these: laziness, drunkenness, gluttony, and kind of examine them all together. What really is the problem here? Notice these three verses here, these three passages. The sluggard's craving will be the death of him because his hands refuse to work, in contrast to the ant that has no ruler and yet he works diligently. 20 verse 1, wine is a mocker, beer is a brawler, whoever is led astray by them is not wise. 25:28, like a city whose walls are broken down is a man who lacks self-control. I think there's one more here. Better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city. What's the point here? When you're given over to laziness or drunkenness or gluttony, you're not in control anymore. Instead, the wise person wants to be in control of himself. He wants to be the master, he needs to be the master of his own domain. That he is, the wise person is controlling his own life, calling the shots, as opposed to simply being controlled by his desires for sleep, his desire for drink, his desire for food. And I'd point you to a passage in 1 Corinthians 6 where Paul, granting the Corinthians' argument, not necessarily agreeing with it fully, but saying, okay, let's just say, like you say, all things are lawful. Paul says, all things are lawful, but I will not be mastered by anything. I will not be brought under the power of anything, some translations say. The point is, I think, appropriate here, talking about the Proverbs. The point of the Proverbs is that in wisdom, I am in control. I am in charge of my own life, and I am directing and driving my life in the fear of the Lord and the knowledge of God. And for the foolish person, he's not in control. Other things, his own desires, are controlling him, and that is a miserable place to be when we're not in control of our own lives. And that's what the Proverbs is pushing us to avoid. Okay, so let's go then to the flip side, literally, of our handout and to the other side of this conversation. First, we'll notice that there are proper uses of each of these three things that we've pointed out. And just notice what that is, generally speaking. Ecclesiastes 5:12, the sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. 31 of Proverbs 6 and 7, give beer to those who are perishing, wine to those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty. Remember their misery no more. By the way, that is right after what we saw earlier, we should note, where King Lemuel's mother said to him, look, you're a king, you're better than this. Okay, you avoid this because you need to have a proper clarity of judgment and you're responsible for yourself and others. And so the follow-up to that is there may be those that are hurting, that are suffering, that are in need of this in a therapeutic way, in a healing way. But again, know that it came after the warning of, you stay away from this. 24, 13, and 14, eat honey, my son, for it is good. Honey from the comb is sweet to your taste. Know also that wisdom is sweet to your soul. If you find it, there's a future hope for you. Your hope will not be cut off. I think there might be one more here. 27, 18, he who tends a fig tree will eat its fruit. He who looks after his master will be honored. A couple things we want to note here about the proper uses for these things. One is that the proper use, it means that these things have a positive, healing, therapeutic effect on a person. And not, on the other hand, the contrast with what we've seen before, these are not simply pleasures to be indulged in for their own sake. I think that's the dangerous picture we saw before. Instead, we see a moderated use of these things for recovery, for healing, for, therapeutic purposes. And the other point we want to make is that these things are simply, you could say in a New Testament language, shadows of the greater fulfillment that we have in the Lord. But maybe in a different way, the wise person understands that sleep, wine, and food, true fulfillment isn't in those things. So I'm not going to seek it there. Instead, I'm going to know where true fulfillment is. In the language of Proverbs, it's wisdom that fills a person up, not food or wine or sleep. Okay, so there are proper uses there that Proverbs comments on, but we really want to end by talking about the principles of diligent work. I'm going to run through these verses and I'll have a slide that makes a point about each of these. And so, just notice what it says about the nature of hard work and wisdom in Proverbs. 14:4, where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of an ox. Don't have oxen, you don't need to clean the stalls. But there is great increase in having oxen, even if they involve cleaning up afterward. 24:27, finish your outdoor work, get your fields ready. After that, build your house. Okay, so make sure your fields are producing before you make your nice, comfy house. 23-27, give careful attention to your herds and to your flocks, because it will benefit you down the road. Okay, we're moving quickly through these, but the next one, 16:26, the laborer's appetite works for him. His hunger drives him on. Okay, so you know that if you don't work, you're going to be hungry. And so you work hard to make sure that doesn't happen. 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty. Not hasty. Hard work, diligent work is thoughtful, planning ahead of time. Slow and cautious. 13:11, dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. So again, hasty, but here dishonest work or dishonest gain, it's not going to last long. Slow, diligent, hard work, little by little. 27:18, he who tends a fig tree will eat its fruit. He who looks after his master will be honored. So there's this idea of submitting to the authorities and recognizing those that are over you and seeking for their honor. And 22:29, you see a man skilled in his work. He will serve before kings. He will not serve before obscure men. So what are the principles? What do we learn from looking at this? These are the same verses in the same order, but just with a point about each one. The good, honest, hard work and producing and caring for the possessions that we have means this. You make sacrifices. Yes, there are inconveniences of working hard and working for yourself. Excuse me. Yes, the pen of the oxen is going to be dirty and you have to clean it up. But having those oxen means that you'll produce a livelihood for yourself. The example I always think of along these lines is You want to have a really clean kitchen, never eat at home. You always eat out, you'll never have dishes to do. Okay? But there's a benefit from eating at home and making your own food. That for lots of reasons, that's a good thing. And in order to benefit from that good thing, you got to clean up. And so there are sacrifices. You accept those inconveniences. That's just the way hard work operates. 24:27. Hey, remember fix the outside first. Get your fields in order first. You got to do hard things first. You got to do the things that are not comfortable, not pleasant, but they're going to benefit you. But instead of looking to what am I going to enjoy? Okay. First thing, okay, what needs to be done? Do the hard things first. That someone has mentioned that before, that you make a to-do list for each day. Do the hardest things first. Then you'll reward yourself by doing other things later, or you won't give yourself the opportunity to rationalize your way out of doing those things later in the day. Okay, take care of the hard, necessary things before anything else. Remember, pay attention to your flocks. Okay, imagine having hundreds of animals. You got to know about each one and pay attention to that. Whatever we have or don't have, our finances, our assets, our liabilities, we got to know what it is. We got to do the tedious work of monitoring the resources that we have, the things and the people that we are responsible for. There's people under us in our family, in our work, to know them, to get to know them, and to take care of them in that way if we're responsible for them. That's tedious. That takes doing hard little things, but that's what it's about. Do we have skin in the game? Remember, the diligent man is motivated by hunger. So is there a way that we can put skin in the game, so to speak, to motivate ourselves? If there's never any consequence, then there's never any reason to change. The example I thought of this is the Dave Ramsey cash envelope system. The idea is that all your money for the month you get in cash, and you put them in envelopes, for groceries and for gas and for eating out and for whatever. And so if you're at the grocery store and, you only have $19.25 and the, bill rings up as $25, well, you got to put things back on the shelf because you only have that money that you brought with you. And sometimes finding ways to put skin in the game and build in consequences is a way to motivate ourselves, since we live in a world that has built so many ways to get out of consequences through credit card debt and other things. 21 verse 5, remember the plans of the diligent as opposed to working hastily. Hard work means working cautiously, working slowly, making plans, being thoughtful. It goes little by little. We should not be interested, be concerned with making it big fast and looking for ways to get a lot of money here, get a lot of money there. First of all, money should not be our ultimate concern. But secondly, there is just wisdom in growing our lives and even our material possessions slowly by being responsible, thoughtful, and patient about that. And then 27:18, a concern for others and authority especially, making the boss look good, honoring them, and showing them that respect. And then 22:29, when it talks about the skilled laborer, work is a skill that we should be concerned with developing, getting better at that, and improving ourselves in that way. Okay, a lot there we could talk about. Maybe you'll get to talk about it if you're gathered with others for this class. Go back to our goals and objectives. Do we understand now the consequences of not having self-control? We may be a little bit more determined to improve our self-discipline. And then with our objectives, if I asked you to do this right now, can you list the things that have control over the sluggard, drunkard, and glutton? And can you list 3 things that those have in common, the sluggard, the drunkard, and the glutton? And then could you list 3 of those principles that we just talked about of disciplined work? But if you are gathered with other people for discussion, spend a few minutes talking about this. What can we do proactively to cultivate good habits, good discipline in our lives? We want to avoid being mastered by our own desires. We talked about that. We want to be in control of our own lives. So what disciplines and habits can we build in to make sure that that is the case and that we are not dominated by our own selfish desires? So you can talk about that if you're with other people, but the class is over. And you can tune back in, same time and place next week for Lesson 11. Thank you so much for watching.